Hello and welcome. My name is Paul and I'm pastor for Colton Community Church. It is great to have you. Hey, you're in store for a really great sermon today. And it's going to be on David and Goliath, something that we've heard and seen so many times before if you've been in church at all. And if you haven't, you have this mythical picture of a young boy slaying this giant man. And it's just incredible, the things we're going to get into. David says in Psalm 8 verse 1, it's right there on your screen. He says, Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And David will say in the name of the Lord later on in this particular passage. And so he has been focusing on the power of the name of God. You know, I'm calling this series David, a flawed heart faithfully following God. Because that's what we have. We have a flawed heart and we faithfully follow God. And so the series is about David and his relationships with others and his heart towards others and his heart towards God and his heart towards himself. And so we're going to learn a lot about it. As we think of David and Goliath, we think a lot of this. We think a lot of these. Look at these pictures. These pictures are children's books. And here you have David, you have this young boy, and he takes a sling, and he's this innocent, naive guy, and he says, oh, there's a bad guy, and the bad guy's insulting God's people, and so I'm going to take and I'm going to kill him. And that's the image that we have. This innocent, naive, pristine man, young man who goes and he kills this giant. And we're going to look at the adult version of this story because we're talking about the heart of David. And as we talk about the heart of David, we're going to see that David's heart isn't quite as pristine, isn't quite as noble as we make it out to be. I like this picture the most of some of the children's books I looked at. When I went to Amazon, I just looked up stories of David and Goliath. They're all over the place. Most of them are children's books. And here's one where you got this big honking guy, and he's running towards, as David is running towards Goliath. And so that's a book that's available. And I want you to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. I'm going to read a lot of the story. I'm going to read through the first 50 verses of this particular chapter. And as I read through it, I'll make comments along the way, hoping you see some things that probably on a casual reading, or even a little better than a casual reading, we will probably miss. See, flawed people with faith are better than flawless people without faith. Flawed people with faith are better than flawless people without faith. And what I mean by flawless people, I mean those people who look good, those people who look the part, those people who present themselves externally as being the ideal candidate. See, this comes up from a theme from 1 Samuel chapter 16 that we looked at last week, where Samuel was told by the Lord to go and anoint the next king. And so Samuel goes to Jesse's house, and he sees Eliab, and he sees the firstborn son of Jesse, and Eliab is tall, and he's good looking, and he's healthy, and Samuel says, that's got to be the man. And the Lord says, hey, don't look at the externals, look at the heart. And today we're going to see Saul. Saul should have been the one to take care of Goliath, but Saul's heart wasn't right. We're going to see that we look at Goliath as being victorious championship because of his external qualifications. And then we're going to look at David. David, a guy who probably shouldn't be there when he is. God uses flawed people, flawed motives, with flawed obedience. And that should, as we begin this sermon, that should really connect with us. God uses flawed people with flawed motives and flawed obedience. If that doesn't allow God to use you, then I don't know what challenges you have to face. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war. Saul and the Israelites assembled and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley in between them. And so here you have the Philistines over here, they're on one side. And then you have the Israelites over here on the other side, on this hill camping, and in between is the valley. And it's called the Valley of Oaks, if you want to know. And what would happen would be this army would send up their best warrior, and they'd meet him in the valley. This army would send out its best warrior, and it would send him in the valley. And really, it's great economics. and they would fight man on man. And the winner would be victorious, and the rest of the army would run hightail, and the winning army would then take captives the losing army. It was really an efficient way to do war. Instead of doing person on person, instead of doing army versus army in both armies, even the winning army losing significant amount of resources, it'd just be one person to one person. Put out your best. There was a champion named Goliath who was from Gath, and he came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 9 feet 9 inches tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of bronze weighing about 125 pounds. On his legs, he wore javelin shin protectors and a bronze javelin that was slung in his back. Can you imagine this? His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its his iron part of the spear shaft weighed 15 pounds. That's about the weight of a shot put. A shot put with a shaft on it, a shot put that is pointy. And his intention, and if that hit you, if he threw that at you, there's no amount of shield protection that's going to prevent that javelin from piercing that shield that you're holding up and getting you. Oh man, 15 pounds thrusted by a guy who's 9 feet 9 inches tall and weighing 125 pounds of armor. This guy is massive. I don't know how tall you can see, but imagine a person who's 9 foot 9 inches tall ultimately going against a guy who's about 5'5". And the guy at 5'5", he could stretch as much as he wants. He is not going to hit Goliath in the face. He's not going to go fisticuffs against Goliath. He's not going to dodge and weave, because there's no way that David could hit Goliath as hard as he wanted in the belly. That's as good as he's going to get. And Goliath is going to undercut, and he's going to send David soaring. He's not even going to go sword to sword, because David's sword is so big, and Goliath's sword is so big, and David is so small. And so David is going to fight this man, but this guy is huge. See, this guy is huge. Well, this is what the writer wanted us to know. The writer wanted us to be impressed with his height. It's this fearless Philistine. He is victorious. This isn't his first fight he's been in. They've conquered other cities. They've conquered other communities. They've conquered other kingdoms. And Goliath is one of them all. On his sash across his thing, he has championships. And maybe on his arm, he has these championships of all the battles that he's won. This is not his first rodeo. He is a champion. He is victorious. Number 2, he is big. The guy is absolutely monstrous. He's ginormous. Number 3, he is strong. He is walking in 125 pounds of armor. I have problems working with a 50-pound bag of cement. And after you got to haul some 50, they make 90-pound bags of cement, and I'm just going, oh my goodness, this is heavy. And you work it over there, and Goliath is wearing that as his armor, plus shin guards, plus a 15-pound javelin. This guy is huge. So he's exceedingly strong, and he is confident because he's seen so many victories. He is absolutely confident. You've got to see the Philistines. The Philistines think they've got an unbeatable warrior in front. And they're coming down, and the Philistines are presenting Goliath to the Israelites. Let's just not leave that with the Philistines and the Israelites, because we do the same thing. We do the exact same thing. We want our warriors to look big and strong. We don't want our lawyers to look small and scrawny. Let's take Captain America. Right? Captain America couldn't be Captain America if he maintained this skinny look. He had to look like this instead. Captain America had to look big and beefy and strong. Why? Because we want our warriors, we want those who are victorious to be big and strong and beefy and victorious. We don't want them to be skinny and weaklings, even if they've got a big heart. Say, we haven't changed much over the thousands of years. Warriors need to be big, they need to be strong, they need to not look like David. So Goliath stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel. He said, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." You like that, huh? That's pretty cool, huh? And so this should have been Saul's battle. This should have been Saul's battle. When Saul hears that, who is the tallest man in the army? Who's the tallest person there? Who's the guy who's most likely to be able to do this? It's probably Saul. See, when Saul became king, he was noted for his height. In 1 Samuel chapter 9, it says, Kish had a son named Saul. He was a head taller than anyone else. Saul was taller than anyone else. And in chapter 1, 1 Samuel 1, chapter 10, verse 23, it says, Saul stood among the people, and he was a head taller than all of the others. Saul was the tallest and probably the biggest man in the Israeli army. Saul is the person who should have been the one going against Goliath. He's the biggest. He's the baddest. But this passage is about a new king. This passage is about a new king doing what the old king should have done. Oh, church, if you're paying attention, that was good. See, the passage is about the transition from Saul being the king to David having been anointed, doing what the king should have done. And so David shows up. Saul isn't about ready to fight Goliath. It says here in the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Saul was terrified. Saul lacked the courage. He lacked the faith. He lacked the trust in the name of God. Goliath looked frightening. Saul is frightened. And David will look foolish. And so the passage changes. It's a paragraph break. And so the passage goes from Saul being frightened, Goliath presenting himself, to this young boy named David. And now there was a son of Jesse who was from Bethlehem in Judea. Jesse had 8 sons. And in Saul's time, Jesse was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab. The second was Abinadab. And the third was Shammah. David was the youngest. He was the baby of the family. The 3 oldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Pay attention. I'm going to come back to that. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward, and every morning and every evening he took his stand. 40 often represents a time of testing in the Bible. It was, the Israelites were in the desert for 40 years being tested and tried. Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, and after 40 days he was tested. 40 is often a time of testing. And Jesse said to his sons, Jesse said to his son David, take 36 pounds of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to the camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of the unit. See how your brothers are doing and bring back some assurance to them. So Jesse gives David some very specific commands. David, I want you to go and I want you to take some bread. When you take some bread and roasted grain to your brothers, right? Take it to your brothers. And then, on top of that, I want you to take some cheese, and I want you to take the cheese to the commander. You've got to make sure the commander, the guy who's coordinating and taking care of your brothers, got to make sure he's well taken care of. And then, David, when you get there, you feed them, you figure out what's going on, and then I want you to come back, and I want you to bring some assurance to me on how things are going, okay? You got it, David? Good. So, Very early in the morning, David took the flocks and he put them in care of a shepherd. And he loaded up and he loaded out as Jesse directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to the battle and shouting its war cry. So it's the beginning of the math. Goliath is going to come down and say, "Ah!" And the Israelites are going to go, "Ah!" And the Israelites were drawing up their lines to fight each other. And David left. What did Dad say? Go give this to your brothers. What did David do? He left it with the stock clerk. And David left his things at the keeper supplies. And he ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers, hey, what are you doing? How are you doing? As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine, the champion of Gath, he stepped out from his lines and he shouted his usual defiance. "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and if I kill him, you will become our subjects and you will serve us. This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled in great fear. So the line breaks up. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him, and will also give his daughter in marriage, and will exempt him and his family from taxes in Israel." And David asked one of the men standing near him, "What will be done to the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And they repeated to him what they had been saying. "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, Eliab burned with anger at David and said, look at what he says. He's going to make some accusations against David. You ready? 1, why have you come here? Obviously, David did not give his brothers the bread he was supposed to and the rice he was supposed to. David didn't say, hey, Eliab, I come and here's your breakfast. Man, I've come to give you some food, some bread and rice, and this should take care of you for the next couple of days. Dad sent me. How you doing? Obviously, based upon the question that Eliab says to David, David didn't do it. 1, David is disobedient. 2, David is irresponsible. With whom did you leave your few sheep in the wilderness? All of a sudden, Eliab's going, what are you even doing here, man? You've got a job. You're being irresponsible, David. What are you doing here? And David, the fact that you're here means that you're being irresponsible. Eliab wouldn't have said that if David would have obeyed his dad. But David disobeyed his dad, and David is just standing there asking questions about what will happen to the person who defeats this soldier. Number 3, I know how conceited you are. Eliab knows how arrogant David is. Family members know your heart. They know your motives. They know what's going on. I know how arrogant you are. I know how wicked your heart is. You're probably going to deceive somebody, David. I know this. You've lied to us before, David. I know how wicked your heart is. And David, not only that, but you came down here only to watch the battle. I know how nosy you are. You've got a job and you're not doing it. You're here and you shouldn't be here. You're being irresponsible. You're being arrogant. You're being wicked. And you're being nosy. David, get out of here. And David responds, now what have I done? Can't I even speak? David gets defensive. Now what have I done? Oh, church. David then turned away to someone else, and he brought up the same matter. And the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for David. Check this out, church. The brothers, you watching? Pay attention. Watch carefully. The brothers know David's flawed heart. They know, family members know. They know your weakness. They know how to push your buttons. Oh, can't I even speak? They know how to push your buttons. They know your motives. They know you better sometimes than you know yourself. David's brothers know his flawed heart. So the question is, what was David's motive for going against Goliath? If you read these children's books, I'm going to bet you none of these children's books point out what I'm going to show you next. What was David's motives? Was it the Goliath was insulting God? Oh, and offending against God? That's not what triggers David to do what David's going to do. Yes, that will ultimately be David's internal motive, but his first inkling is not that. Are they pristine? Is David as naive and pristine as we make him out to be? Oh, watch this. Let's go back. Remember I told you to look? Let's go back at this. This is not David's first trip to camp. This is not David's first trip to camp. What does that say in verse 14? The oldest of three sons followed, but David went back and forth. David had been there to give his brothers food before. David had reported on the fight to his dad, Jesse, more than once. David had gone back and forth. Remember, they've been at this camp for 40 days. David's come back and forth, back and forth. And so David has seen and he's heard this Philistine before. And then in verse 25, he hears this. He hears of a reward. What's the reward? For this young shepherd boy who spends his time bored to tears watching stupid sheep, wondering how he's ever going to meet a girl, wondering how he's ever going to make any money, wondering how life is going to happen. And all of a sudden he hears this reward. He hears about great wealth coming, and he knows he's a poor shepherd. He hears about getting the king's daughter. Oh man, that would change his life. That's like winning the lotto. He would know that he wouldn't have taxes for the rest of his life. This gets David's attention. 40 days they've been there. David's been going back and forth. This is the first time he hears about the reward. See, number 3, the reward has David's attention. See, he heard it. Now he digs in a little deeper. David asked the men standing there, what will be done? David heard it, and then David asked some other men to confirm what he had heard from the first guys. What will be done? Great wealth, the daughter of the king, and exempt from taxes. Oh, wow. And then David adds, after the reward, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? It is only, look at that. Look at the order that the writer put it. It is only after David hears about the reward that David sees Goliath offending the armies of God. He's not just serving, he's just not going to do this for a feel-good moment. David's motive, right? His brother said it. We know that you're greedy. David's motive is partially due to greed. See, number 4, David is interested in the reward. When David gets yelled at by his brothers, what does he say? Can't I even speak? And then what's the rest of the passage say? Then he turned to someone else and he says, he brought up the same matter. What will be done to the guy who gets rid of that stain against the armies of the living God? David, the pristine boy that we see throwing a rock, slinging a stone, his motive is like his brother said. There's a little bit of greed. There's a little bit of wickedness in there. You know what, church? Not for greed, but it's okay. It is okay to get rewarded for doing God's work. It is okay. You do something for the Lord, and sometimes you do it out of pure motives, but it's okay if you get paid to do God's work. God many times say, you live this way and there's a blessing coming. You're doing it for the blessing. You're doing it for the compensation. Well, in Jesus' parables, says, my good and faithful servant, you have done much with little, I'm going to give you more. And what do we have? We have the reward of heaven looming towards us who believe. Oh, it's okay. It's okay to be rewarded for doing God's work. However, it's not the reward that saves. It is faith that saves. You need to make sure that your motive is true. Your motive needs to be the faith in the living God that has the power to accomplish the miraculous. That has the power to save, that has the power to redeem, that has the power to renew. It's in the God that you trust. In the process, being blessed in the process is not that bad. See, Goliath, his thinking was flawed. He thought that he was going against the armies of Israel. He looked out on from his side of the hill, from his side of the valley, and he sees a bunch of men. David's thinking theologically. David's flawless thinking is that this uncircumcised Philistine is threatening the God of Israel. When he comes out, he says, you know what? This guy is offending the God of Israel. Your name, O Lord, is majestic. And this guy, he's massacring the name of God. Verse 32, David said to Saul, remember, Saul called David up, and Saul heard about what David said, and Saul calls David up, and David now has approached Saul. Saul is taller than David, and David said, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go against him to fight. Remember David's motives? Watch this. He doesn't quite release to Saul how he would go about fighting Goliath. And Saul replied, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight against him. Remember the theme of what things look like as well? Goliath looks like a victorious champion, the biggest monstrous champion you could have. David looks like a little runt compared to him. David, in fact, is the last born son. And if you've got a puppy of litters, a lot of times it's the final puppy we call the runt of the litter. It's the smallest of the litter. David is smaller than his brothers. David is the runt of the litter. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior for his youth. He's got the badges. He's got the crown. You don't. And David's flawed heart, he deceives Saul on how he's going to fight Goliath. David's faith in God's deliverance is what saves him. Watch this. Verse 34. David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, he went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, and I struck it, and I killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defiled, David is thinking theologically, he has defiled the armies of the living God. The Lord will rescue me from the paw, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, the Lord will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. I am absolutely, completely confident. My brothers call it arrogance. I call it faith. I am absolutely and completely confident that because this guy is offending the armies of the living God, that I will see him gone. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And then Saul dressed David in his own tunic, and he put on a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened his sword over the tunic, and he tried to walk around because he was not used to them. David said, I can't go in these. I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Side note, I believe this teaches us an important lesson. You can't fight the Lord's battles using somebody else's armor. You can't. You can't fight somebody else's battles you can't fight the Lord's battles using somebody else's armor. You have been gifted by God. You have been uniquely gifted by God to fight the battles that you are facing. You can't fight your battles using my armor. It just won't work. You can't fight your spiritual fight using anybody else's armor. It just won't work. And nor can I fight the spiritual battles using your armor, your gifts, your abilities, your talents. Church, God has uniquely gifted you, uniquely equipped you with the armor that you need to fight the battles you face. And what you need today is different than what I need today. Church, pay attention to this. You need to fight spiritually using your faith, not somebody else's faith. You need to fight spiritually using your skills, not their skills. You need to fight spiritually using your abilities, not their abilities. Some of you are absolutely brilliant. And you're able to come up with instant arguments if someone's talking to you. You're able to rebuke and rebut their arguments instantaneously. I'm not wired like that. I need some time. You give me an argument, I need some time to think in the process, and then I can come back with a decent argument. But it takes me a while. I'm not a good debater. You might be a great debater. That's fine. But however you're going to fight, you need to make sure that it's you depending upon God, not you depending on my faith to save your spiritual battles. Verse 40. And then David took his staff in his hand. He uses that as a deceptive technique. He chooses 5 stones from the stream, and he put them in a pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, I always feel like Batman when he said it. Meanwhile, back in the Batcave. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked at David over, and he saw that he was a little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. Remember the theme. The theme started in chapter 16 when David looked at Eliab, and he said, oh, he's him. And God said, don't look. Don't look at the externals. It's a matter of the heart. You guys look at the externals, and you judge that person whether they're competent and capable. God judges on the heart. Goliath is guilty of the same thing. He looks at David, and he judges David by being young and handsome, and he despised him. The Israelites, they made that mistake. They looked at Goliath, and they said, he's invincible because he's huge, he's big, he's monstrous, he's a deep voice. Right? We judge on the externals, and we say, oh, that person can't be defeated. That person's so smart. That person is based upon their titles or their treasures or their talents or their talk. We judge externally. And God says, but what about their heart? What about their motives? And Goliath despised David. And he said to David, am I a dog that you should come at me with a stick? Remember? David is coming at him, and he has a staff in his hand. The staff is a decoy. The staff is something, what am I going to do? Hit you in the shin? What am I going to do? Hit you in the back of the leg? It might hurt. One person said this about how David is approaching this, battle. He says, David broke the rules of engagement. It is a below-the-belt sucker punch he gives to Goliath. It is a man with a howitzer mowing down a peasant with a pitchfork. David with a howitzer. Goliath with a pitchfork. See, in the military, in the ancient military, there were 3 categories, three divisions in the army. There were the charioteers. They were the ones that had horses and chariots, and these were the quickest, fastest, meanest people in the bunch. And they would be the ones that would ramrod an army, and they'd come through, and they would successfully make an indentation into the ranks. And then beyond that, then you'd have the infantrymen. This is the Goliaths. They would come in, sword and shield, and they would fight hand to hand, and they would come and they would chop off heads and stab and gut and those things. And then you had the external people, those people on the outside. They were the artillerymen. The artillerymen, the ones, the bows and the arrows. And also they had those who were called stringers. A stringer. Somebody that could take and sling a rock. Ancient warfare said this. There was a Greek war in which one of the armies was completely decimated, not by the charioteers, not by the infantrymen, but by the fact that they had a whole bunch of slingers, slinging rocks, defeating the army, because they were incredibly, incredibly accurate. Want to know how accurate they were? Look at Judges chapter 20. There's a group of 700 slingers. Chapter 20, verse 16 is an incredible verse. It says at the beginning, verse 15, "And the Benjamites mustered an army to fight the battle. And among the men in the army that the Benjamites mastered were 700 men handpicked who were left-handed. And everyone could sling a stone at a hare." Not a rabbit, but a hare. And they would not miss. That's how accurate these slingers were. They would swing and they would not miss. Slinging. And David is approaching Goliath, and David has the staff as a decoy, and he has his rocks, and he has his sling in his other hand, and he's going to whip out that rock and whip out that ring, and he is going to get Goliath in the head. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." And David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with a sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head." Strike, interesting. "This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And all those who gathered here will know that it is not by sword, it is not by spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all into your hands." Our hands. He will give all into our hands, because you, Goliath, have offended God. And as the Philistines moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. And reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead, because David had that kind of accuracy. Because when David was a shepherd, he had nothing better to do but to practice slinging a stone. And the stone sank into the head, and he fell face downward onto the ground. And so David triumphed over the Philistines with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine, and he killed him. And David ran and stood over him, and he took hold of the Philistine's sword, that big honking sword, and he lifted it up, and it was heavy, and whoosh, he cut off the head of the Philistine. And when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and they ran, because that's how they fought a battle. And then the men of Israel, they saw that Goliath was dead, and they marched out and they started running after the Philistines. They crossed through the valley, giving the Philistines a head start. They crossed through the valley, and the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath, which was Goliath's hometown, and the gate of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharon road to Gath and Ekron. And when Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered the camp. Let me close with just a few quick thoughts on this. Flawed people with faith are better than flawless people without faith. Flawed people with faith are better than flawless people without faith. In other words, it is better to be broken and in the battle than it is to look good and not in the battle at all. All of us are flawed. The scriptures say that all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The scriptures teach that there's an ideal perfection, and none of us have captured it. And we get the challenge. Are we going to be like the Israelite army facing Goliath and living in fear? Or are we going to accept our flaws? And it doesn't matter what our motivation is. If our motivation is the reward, hey, you're being used by God to accomplish his purpose. to bring glory and honor to God, do it. See, there was another battle that happened later on, years after David. One of David's great-great-great-great-grandsons through the line of Mary, his name was Jesus. Jesus was a flawless person. Jesus was absolutely flawless, but it's interesting, he didn't look good. He didn't look the part. Jesus defeated Satan on the cross. The flawless one defeated the flawed one, Goliath. Jesus defeated Satan. And it is through faith in Jesus' victory that we are saved. It is through faith, if you will, it is through faith in David's victory over Goliath that the Israelites were saved and they plundered the Philistines. It is through faith in the work of Jesus Christ that you are saved. And you trust that Jesus defeated Satan. And you are saved. You are saved to fight the spiritual battles in front of you. Flawed people with faith are better than flawed people without faith. And God uses flawed people and complex characters. God is not looking for the flawless believer, church. He's not looking for the believer that looks perfect, that's ideal, that he's looking for somebody willing to trust him, willing to give their life for him, willing to recognize and lift up the name of the Lord. He is looking for someone like you to trust him, to defeat the Goliaths in your life. For you to take this moment and say, you are victorious in Christ. So go plunder and bring back those who are lost, those who are the least, those who are lonely, and bring them into the victorious army of God. Oh, we've got a lot to learn about David in the next coming months. But today, let's learn about Jesus, the one who conquered sin, conquered death, and let's put our faith in him. And let's rejoice in our redemption, and let's trust him in the battle. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you for this opportunity to see you work, to know that you have defeated, you have conquered. Satan no longer has power over us. He has no authority over us because he is dead. He is gone. He is powerless as Goliath is to David. And Lord, forgive us for resurrecting Satan. And Lord, allowing us. Forgive us, Lord, for living under the fear of a defeated enemy. Thank you, Jesus, for hope. Thank you for joy. Thank you for patience and kindness. And Lord, use this sermon to remind us to trust you. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Hey, thank you very much for watching. There are just a couple of steps that we want you to take. And if you have your phone with you, just scan the QR code, or if you're watching on your phone, simply tap on the link. The link will take you to a couple of things. One, a place to donate. It's always important that we're faithful in giving back to God. If he has blessed us, we're blessed to be a blessing, so we would ask you to give generously to the church. 2, to connect with us. Let us know who you are. Let us know who you are. And 3, how to pray for you. We love to pray for you, and so I can testify I've seen God work miracles, and so we'd love to see and join in prayer for you. Also, we'd love for you to come and visit. So just make way and come on a Sunday morning and visit. That way you get to see the live version of it instead of the live stream version of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to text those as well. But make sure that you subscribe. That becomes important to us. And make sure that you also like this video. The more people that like the video, the more people it will reach. So thank you very much for watching, and have a blessed day.